All right, so good morning, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I'm with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And we are particularly excited this April because all month long we are celebrating and showcasing climate research, climate change, and solutions to climate change, all made possible by Environment and Climate Change Canada, who is sponsoring us for the first ever month dedicated to that topic. So thank you so much to them. Right now, we are joined by all 7 of our classes from across North America, so I want to give them a chance to do a bit of a shout out before we dive in. We've got Miss Dix's group, grade 7-8 or grade 4 through 8, Woodstock, Ontario, on their break. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hey, we've got Miss Dawson's class joining us for the first time, 3-4s in Toronto, Ontario. Hi, guys.
Hi.
That's some like first timer enthusiasm. I love it. We've got Miss Tishkov's grade 8s in Woodbridge, Connecticut.
Oh, hey.
Hi.
Hey, we've got Miss Carlson's grade 2s in San Antonio in Texas. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Many of you. We've got Miss Fuchco's grade 4s in Algonquin, Illinois, who hopefully can hear us. Hey, guys. Hi. We got them in. We've got Miss Robertson's grade 8s in Mississauga, Ontario. Hi, guys.
Hi.
And last but not least, we've got Miss Miller's grade 5s in Brampton, Ontario. Hi. I don't think I can demute you, but your excitement is palpable. It's all there. We appreciate it. All right. Of course, the reason you guys are all here today is for our speakers. So we're joined live by Alex and Tyler Mifflin, who you will know as the Water Brothers. Through their eco-adventure series, they have explored the world from Mexico to the Caribbean, India to Tanzania and more, finding out the most important water stories of our time. So today they're going to share a little bit about their adventures and some of the solutions to climate change and water conservation that they've come across in their many years of amazing work. Without further ado, thank you guys so much for joining us, and take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, we're really happy to be here and speak to all of you across Canada and the U.S. Yeah, so we are the Water Brothers. For the last 6 years, we've been going around the world. We've actually traveled to over 30 countries, filming over 25 different documentaries about the biggest challenges facing our freshwater and oceans all around the world. Are you having trouble hearing us?
So I can hear you. I don't know if it's one class that might not be able to.
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, I think the sound's on. Okay. So, yeah, we've been going all around the world looking at the biggest challenges facing our water, our oceans, and our fresh water around the world. But not just talking about what the problems are. You know, that's easy. There's a lot of problems and a lot of threats facing water. But more importantly, we're talking about solutions. We are really, geared up to engage people and make them more aware of what's going on and what we can really do to live in harmony with our water resources. Because water is the essence of all life on Earth. All living things require water to survive. And that's why it's so critical that we do everything possible to protect it. And there's a lot of reasons why climate change is such a big threat to water, which we're going to get into today. Short little trailer so you can get a sense of what the types of things we film in our show and what we do. So we'll just kick things off showing you that trailer.
Awesome. While you guys are getting screen share up, I just want to note for the classes that if the class can't hear, you can go on YouTube. I just passed you guys the link so you can watch there, okay? Perfect. And the trailer's up, guys. Go for it.
We're getting our last look at the mainland right now. Next stop, Cocos Island.
It's so cool to think that we're floating at the lowest point on Earth right now.
Life as we know it requires living water for its survival.
We're really excited to get into the water because the entire reef ecosystem changes at night. All right! It's huge. Woo! If we can't get this problem solved, we'll be out of business.
So quite amazingly, we've come to the new headwaters of the lower Jordan River.
How could it be allowed to get like this? They're the start of what will be a very difficult journey for them.
This is ours, and this is where we're all from. We have to be a good steward of it because nobody else can take care of it but us.
See, all right. Let me go back here. There we go. You guys got us back now? All right. So yeah, so that was the trailer for our third season. And really, as you can see, we look at a lot of stories around the health of our oceans, different river systems, access to clean water, sanitation, overfishing, basically any of the really big environmental challenges we face in the world today. That's the kind of stories that we do with our documentary series. And what we really do is try to look at these challenges through the lens of water. We look at all these challenges, they're very complex, and we try to make it really, simplify it down for everyone to really understand how it is that water is the central theme, or is a really important factor in this environmental story and the challenge. And by looking at through the lens of water, it really helps us and our viewers hopefully understand how they're connected to that challenge, even though the problem might be happening on the other side of the planet. From where they live, but how they're connected to that issue through water, and what we can all do to help solve that problem by better harmonizing our relationship with fresh water, with our oceans, through our purchasing habits and sort of daily consumer activities. So it's really a unique way to look at these challenges and really hopefully arm people with the knowledge of how they can be part of the solution.
And so one of the topics we cover a lot in the show, we've done it in many episodes, is climate change, because climate change is really a story about water. Because the ways that we're always going to experience and suffer from climate change is really how climate change impacts the water around us. So we have, we often associate climate change with just global warming, and yes, the planet is heating up, but one of the consequences of heating up the atmosphere is that it's actually able to hold more moisture. So you have the planet heating up, the oceans actually absorb a lot of the heat, that excess heat. And when you have oceans warming, it can mean more evaporation. And you have the atmosphere, when it warms up, it can hold more moisture. So that's one of the reasons why we're seeing this pattern, this trend of more intense rainfall events, more intense hurricanes and storms, rising sea levels. So that means we have more fresh water in the ice caps and the glaciers melting. So we have all this ice on the planet at the poles, it's melting. That's fresh water going into the ocean, which raises sea level. And then we also have the oceans, as they warm themselves, they expand. They actually expand. So we have rising sea levels. And when you have rising sea levels, that means salt water is going deeper inland. That can mean the salt water gets into the soil deep inland and into the groundwater deep inland. So we have groundwater that's getting too salty, like water that you take out of a well. And then we also have farmland that gets too salty too. And then you can't grow crops on there. So these are some of the ways that we're experiencing and suffer from climate change that we might not always think about. Of course, we also have more intense droughts. So we have more rainfall, we have more water in some places because of climate change. And then we also have less water. So we have these droughts, these really intense droughts, which are becoming more common in areas where, they might already experience droughts, but now they're happening more often than they used to. And so that's why we really have to be concerned, because it affects everything. It affects how we grow our food. It affects the cities we live in, our ability to live on the coastline. And it can also cause people to move in large numbers from areas. Because what happens when your well is too salty, or your soil becomes too salty, or it's too many droughts, or too many wildfires? You have to move. And this is another consequence of climate change as it impacts water, is that can actually force people to move on large scales. And we're seeing that happen around the world. So it's a very complex issue. But one of the ways that we can simplify it and make these connections clear to people is thinking about climate change through water and how it impacts water. Because ultimately, that's how climate change is going to affect us. It's through water. And a lot of the solutions are water sort of based solutions, if you want to think about it that way. So we really got to think about climate change through water.
And so Alex and I, one thing we always try to, people often, as Al mentioned, think of climate change as just a story about global warming, or they think of it's a story that's only affecting places like in the Arctic or in Antarctica. But as Al just mentioned, these things affect people across the globe, no matter where you live. And it's affecting us right now. It's not some problem that's, down the road. We are already experiencing climate change that's having massive impacts on agriculture, how we grow and produce our food, our cities, So this is a problem that's affecting everyone on the planet right here and right now. And so it is up to all of us to try and do some things about it, whether that's small actions in our daily lives, or, as you guys get older and, putting pressure on governments to enact better policies and regulations that we can help speed up how we sort of adapt and manage the changes that are already happening and coming our way. Mm-hmm. So Alex and I, as Al mentioned, we've done a number of episodes looking at climate change, from looking at it in places like the Middle East, looking at it in the Arctic, but also looking at it here in Canada. That's in places that are a bit closer to where most of the, our population lives. So one of the big things that Al mentioned, the glacier, sort of the Antarctica and the Arctic, but it's also affecting glaciers on mountain ranges all across the world. And in particular in Canada, we have some big mountain ranges in the Rockies that are a huge sort of like a water tower. As the glaciers store water over winter and builds up over time, and that water, as it warms up, slowly melts down the mountains into rivers and streams and goes across the country, and really is a big source of water for our agriculture, how we grow food. And so we did an episode looking at how climate change is impacting Canada, from farmers to cities. So we want to show you a clip from that episode that shows you a little segment we did on one of Canada's biggest glaciers and how the melting and the warming is impacting that glacier and people all across the country
and in the U.S. as well, because as you'll see, that's connected to a big river in the U.S. known as the Columbia.
So
check that.
We're going to show you this video. One sec. Yeah.
One of the most fascinating aspects of visiting glaciers like the Athabasca is that the passage of time is so visible here. Beside me is a marker showing where the toe or terminus of the glacier stood in 1908. Just a little over a century ago, this entire valley would have been covered in ice. But since then, this glacier has receded by over 1.5 kilometers.
Atop the Athabasca, we joined hydrologist Dr. John Pomeroy, who studies the impact of climate change on Canada's water resources, and is one of several scientists who is helping to track the retreat of glaciers from the Columbia icefield.
The Columbia icefield is one of these remarkable points in North America. It's a triple point continental divide. So water out of this icefield flows towards the Athabasca River, then down the Mackenzie to the Arctic Ocean. It flows down the Saskatchewan River, which then forms the Nelson and goes into Hudson Bay after crossing all three prairie provinces. And on the BC side, it forms the Columbia River, which drains across British Columbia and then through Washington State and Oregon to the Pacific Ocean. So you've got three oceans fed from this, and millions of people rely on the rivers that start at this point.
This ice field feeds some of the biggest river systems in North America. But as temperatures rise and precipitation patterns shift, this water tower of the West has become one of the first casualties of climate change.
You have to remember that all glaciers are doing is storing snowfall from previous years. It's the amount of rain and snow that's driving the hydrology and the stream flow and filling the lakes along the Rockies. And that's been changing as well. So there's more rainfall, less snowfall over time as the temperature is going up. And that means that the snowpacks are not lasting as long into the summer as they used to.
When more rain falls instead of snow, the consequences can be disastrous.
In 2013, of course, there was tremendously heavy rainfall that hit the Rockies in June of that year when there was a late-line snowpack above Banff. And many areas had rain on snow, but it was mainly a rainfall-driven flood event that hit Calgary on June 20th and 21st and caused tremendous destruction. It was the most destructive natural disaster in Canadian history, driven by intensely heavy rainfall in the mountains. In previous years, in June, a heavy precipitation would come with snow in the high Rockies. So it would have been good skiing instead of a natural disaster.
John showed us large sections of ice that were covered in black dust and soot from forest fires. As this dark material builds up, it absorbs solar radiation and melts the ice beneath it, further speeding up the loss of glaciers.
So it's really all interconnected. I mean, you have your warmer, drier temperatures, which make forests more susceptible to fires, and the fires can have this, spin-off effect on glaciers.
Yes, and not just fires, dust storms. in a really dry year, we'll get more dust storms. And sometimes they can be at a great distance, coming from China or from the western United States or dry parts of British Columbia, and then come a great distance and deposit on here.
Rising temperatures have not only triggered the loss of glaciers across the Rockies, but have also caused significant declines in spring snow cover.
You know, we're getting a benefit from this extra water coming off, and that comes in late summer. And the fastest melt rates are coming off in the hottest, driest summers. So when Western Canada is having a drought and the forest fires are burning, everything's going, there's not much other source of stream flow, that's when these glaciers are really important. The problem is we've become used to that. And so we expect every time a drought comes in, the glaciers will kick in and make it not quite so bad for our rivers. And we've had tremendous advantages due to this as well. We haven't had to build as many dams and water storage facilities in the Canadian prairies and in British Columbia as parts of the western United States have, because we've relied on glaciers and snow to bank our water into the summer and all that.
Canada is the second largest producer of hydroelectricity in the world, and hydropower accounts for nearly 60% of all electricity produced in the country. So any changes to stream flows will have a significant impact on energy production, as well as the number and size of dams we will need to build in the future.
The warming that has occurred already, even if we stopped emitting any further greenhouse gases tomorrow into the atmosphere, this Athabasca Glacier is doomed. The rate of its recession right now, this will disappear, as will most of the glaciers in the Canadian Rockies.
So how much longer does it have left?
It's estimates about 60 years for this. So we're around 2050, 2060, depending on how things go. But those estimates were done before we had the last 3 summers of record mass balance. So my personal estimate is that we could see the end of the lower part of the Athabasca within my lifetime, even in the 2030s, 2040s.
Between 1920 and 2005, we may have lost as many as 300 glaciers in the Canadian Rocky Mountain National Parks alone. And what we see from this is that if the trend continues, we could lose as much as 90% of our glacial ice by the end of this century. But the most important thing we learned from this is the warming that is causing the ice to disappear is also affecting snowpack and snow cover, and that changes water security.
So it was a bit of a long video there, but everything in there was really important to talk about these connections with climate change and water. And right at the end there, you heard that professors talk about snowpack. So we often think of climate change affecting the ice at the poles or glaciers, but it's snow anywhere. Maybe the classroom in Texas doesn't know much about snow, and maybe this doesn't apply to them, but I think all the other classrooms involved, they know a thing or two about snow. So no matter where you live, if you live in a place that normally gets snow, this is a way that you're going to be impacted by it, because when you have rain instead of snow, so you get a big rainfall event in the winter, and it causes all that snow that's already there to melt. That's a big problem, because we often rely on the snow melting slowly, right? You know, as spring begins and sort of as the end of winter, we want that to come out slowly. When we have these big rainfall events instead of snow, all that water then rushes out, and it can cause big changes in the ecosystem, and that means more water is rushing away instead of getting stored in groundwater or slowly leaving streams and rivers. And that's something that a lot of our ecosystems here in sort of more northern areas, they really depend on that. And we depend on those water resources just for all the things we use in our daily life. So it's a lot of reasons why we have to be concerned about what's happening. And why we did that episode is because we wanted people to know that, like Tyler said, climate change is not some phenomenon that's happening away from us in the Arctic or in the middle of the Pacific. It's right in our own backyards, and the warning signs are already there.
And what's really interesting about climate change and with these more intense rainfall events is that it can be a contributing factor to other really big problems like plastic pollution in our oceans or in our lakes and rivers. So, you know, when I was saying you have these big rainfall events or things melt, that can flood big areas of cities. And then those cities, like all the plastic or any garbage on the streets, the municipal the treatment plants can't handle all that water, so they often have to release untreated water into the river or to a lake or potentially right to the ocean. So that's also how a lot of plastic is entering into our oceans, is through big rainfall events that brings, sort of pushes that the plastic or garbage or pollutants, chemicals into our lakes, rivers, and oceans, which is a really bad thing. So there's tons. That's just one example. There's plenty more of different spin-off effects that climate change is having, not just on water, and warm temperatures, but things like plastic pollution.
And we have one other video we're going to show with you today. And then I think soon after that, we're going to try and do some questions because we really want to make sure we have lots of time for that. But we're going to show you one other video about warming lakes. And then we'll talk a little bit about why that matters so much. So, yeah, we'll just go to the video.
Let's see. One sec here. Oh, did I close it? I think I closed it. One sec here, guys. Sorry, just want to pull it up here.
No hurry, all good.
Well, there we go. Yeah, that's it.
Oh, it's gonna open. It's 360. Sorry, guys.
That's okay.
One sec here. I'm getting it on. There we go. All right, I'm gonna share this screen with you. One sec. Well, let's do the entire screen. I'm gonna go here. All right.
The left side.
This one here. All right, guys, let's check this one out. It's about warming lakes.
We studied 235 lakes around the world, and these represent more than 50% of the world's freshwater supply. And what we found was that 90% of the world's lakes are warming. Several regions warmed faster than other regions. So, for example, the Great Lakes region has been warming at much higher rates than the rest of the world. So 2 to 3 times faster than the global average. Lake Superior is the second fastest warming lake in the world, which you might not expect because it's such a big lake. We thought the smaller lakes would warm the fastest, but some of these really large lakes are warming at really rapid rates as well.
One major reason why Canadian lakes are warming faster is due to the longer exposure to warm air temperatures because of reduced ice coverage, which is also speeding up evaporation and causing water levels to drop in some areas.
As we have increasingly hot summers, we can expect longer and more intense algal blooms.
As heavy bursts of rainfall become more common, more phosphorus will wash into lakes from farmland and municipal sewage systems, leading to more algae blooms that can be toxic to humans, pets, and wildlife.
So the period when we're not allowed to swim in lakes, when we have to look for alternative sources of water because the cyanobacterial toxins that are a health hazard cannot be filtered out with the algae. So water quality is certainly directly linked to climate change.
Right.
Okay, so that video just talks. It's a short one, but again, it's some really important points about warming. So we have our lakes are warming, and in places like Canada and through a lot of the U.S., they're warming at twice the rate of the global average. And 90% of the world's lakes that they studied were warming. So and they studied half the lakes in the world. So they did cover a lot. And so the evidence is there, and this really matters. And right there at the end, when we were talking about algae blooms, just for those of you who may not be familiar with that, is that in all types of water, you have plants that grow called algae. And there's many different species of algae. And some of those species that do really well in warm water, when they grow out of control, they produce toxins, and these types of algae are known as cyanobacteria or blue-green algae, and these can be really dangerous for drinking water. So when we have these big algae blooms in fresh water, it can actually make our water, our lakes, undrinkable, and our treatment plants
unusable.
unusable.
You can't go in them.
So this is one of the consequences of climate change that we were talking about at the beginning. This is why it matters. This is how we're connected through climate change through water. Because how we're actually going to suffer from climate change. Imagine if you can no longer turn on your tap because your source of drinking water has a toxic algae bloom in it. And this is not something that's just going to happen in the future. It's already happening. There's this, the city of Toledo, Ohio in 2014, the summer of 2014, they had to stop using their drinking water for several days because of a toxic blue-green algae bloom. So this is already happening in the Great Lakes, right at all of our backyards here. It's happening right now. We do need to be concerned. It's a very complex topic talking about climate change and water, but we hope we gave you a little bit of a rundown about some of the reasons why we need to be concerned. Warming, rising sea levels, melting ice, melting snow, how this impacts algae blooms, how it impacts our cities. These issues are all interconnected, and they can sometimes be complex. And we just hope that through our show, and you can maybe learn a little bit about some of these connections, and it can help make it a little bit simpler for people to understand so that they can be empowered with knowledge. But we want to make sure that we didn't leave anything out, or we have a chance to answer some questions. So I think we have time for a Q&A, right?
We got lots of time for Q&A.
Okay, great. Okay, so we can. I'll let you manage which questions come in, or yeah. Anything about water, yeah.
Awesome, guys. Thanks so much. And I love how many messages there about how everything's interconnected, which is something that we don't get in a lot of presentations. It was a real benefit of yours, so thank you for that. Before we dive in, I want to know we've got a few groups watching on YouTube Live as well. If you guys want to type in your questions, I'll pass them along, so please do that. Don't be shy. But let's start with Ms. Dixon's class. If you guys want to kick us off with a question, come on up.
We actually don't have a question. We just wanted to tell you about what our We group has been doing. So we've got Adrienne here, and she wants to tell you a little bit about that.
So what we're doing for We Are the Change is we're doing this fundraiser for kids who don't have clean water so they can get clean water. And we're doing this field trip to go down to the lake and see like what it's like carrying water back from the lake.
That's excellent. We're so happy to hear you're doing that. There's over 700 million people around the world that don't have access to clean water, and it's a lot. It's a lot of people. And going down to the lake to see, carrying water. There's a lot of people around the world that have to carry water long distances, and it's often young women who are tasked with that in a lot of the world. So. If you're interested, we have an episode you can watch of ours called No Woman, No Water, where they talk about why it's such a big issue for women's rights, clean water. So we'd encourage you all to check that out if you have some time. And we're just really glad to hear about your work that you're doing. And yeah, keep it up.
Yeah, awesome. And we'll pass along, so we'll ask you guys both at the end, whatever way we can get the resources you guys do to all our classes, we'll share all of that, all the social media, all the episodes, everything. Awesome. Miss Dawson's class, come on up, guys. You guys have a question.
Marianne, we have a question from Marianne. Marianne, stand up. Marianne.
Come on up, Marianne.
Yeah.
What can we do as kids to help climate change?
Ooh, the big one. What can we do as kids to help climate change?
Big one. Well, the good thing is there's so many things we can all do, particularly as youth. There's so many things you can do to help with climate change. One of the biggest ones that many people don't really talk about a lot is actually through your diet. Through your diet is probably your biggest connection with the environment, with sort of water use, land use, loss of biodiversity. So trying to move away from really energy, water-intensive sources of food. So things like red meat. So trying to just, you don't have to be a vegetarian or a vegan, but if you can eat a little bit less red meat or, livestock, dairy or anything, that actually can have a really big impact on a positive impact on the environment. Yeah, that's one thing.
So livestock and dairy production is responsible for about 15% of global CO2 emissions. So, that's a really big thing that you can do in your daily life is to think about, how you might be able to reduce the carbon footprint of your diet. And there's lots of resources out there. We have lots of episodes that talk about that as well. But that's something that you can investigate. We'd encourage you to learn about more yourself as well from lots of different resources about how your diet can be one of the biggest ways you can reduce your carbon footprint.
Excellent. And that's a message we actually haven't gotten any of our hangouts this month. So I really appreciate you guys talking about that.
Great.
All right, Miss Tishkoff. Now, I know you guys didn't know earlier. Can you hear us now?
Yes, we can hear Jesse.
Oh.
We've been listening to the rest on YouTube.
Okay, so ask a question. Go right ahead, guys.
Right, so we'll have to listen on YouTube, but we can talk. Who's going first? Hannah. First question. Someone needs to read her first question.
Okay. When was your first spark of interest in water?
Ooh, good question.
I think we've always been into water. You know, if everyone who likes to be alive, I think they're all sort of into water. It's in some way or another. So we've been big fans of water since we were born. We were born in water, actually. So like everyone. But no, we really got interested in water because we were really interested about learning about what are the solutions to all these big environmental problems. I think growing up, you're sort of inundated with, you know, the loss of biodiversity and wildlife around the world, learning about, you know, the threat of climate change. But it's like, what do we do about it? And whenever we looked at what the problems were and what the solutions were, everything was coming back to water. So we originally thought, you know, that we might want to be like wildlife filmmakers or wildlife cinematographers, but everything we wanted to talk about, it was all about threatened animals. Everything was threatened, and it's like, why? We're asking ourselves, why is this? And we can't just go out there and film animals or film wildlife and say, oh, everything's great, look how much wildlife there is. It's like, no, it's all disappearing, and why is that? And so whenever we got thinking about what the solutions are, it always came back to water. And then we said, you know, we have to do like a show about this. We can't even just do one film. One like 1.5 hour film couldn't cover all the issues and solutions that need to be talked about. So that's when it became the idea of wanting to do a series, like a TV series with, you know, 30-minute episodes, and so it just allowed us to cover as many subjects as possible and all these different connections to water. So that's it, kind of where it all came from. It's just a love of nature and wildlife and wanting to do something that could, you know, promote solutions. And everything always comes back to water. It's almost impossible to talk about any big issue in the world today. It could be the economy. The economy is based on water, essentially, if you want to break it down. And so that's in a nutshell how we were sparked with an interest in water.
Outstanding, guys. All right, Miss Crosland's class. Let's go to Texas with no snow. You guys have a question? Come on up, guys. Yep. Oh.
Just talk into it. Just talk loud. It's okay.
Don't be shy. All good.
Can algae blooms get in our underground aquifer and get our water from the aquifer?
Good question. Can algae blooms get in our underground aquifers and, you know, mess with them as well?
I don't believe they can get into aquifers because algae needs sunlight. So yeah, they like the warm water, but they need sunlight because they're plants. They need sunlight just like any other plant. In the ocean, there's a type of algae or, you know, plants, microscopic plants called phytoplankton, and phytoplankton are responsible for producing half of the oxygen we breathe. That's just a cool fact, kind of unrelated to algae blooms, but I just thought I'd throw that in there because I think that's a really important reason to care about climate change in the ocean as well, because climate change in the ocean is having a big impact on phytoplankton. So they're not all algae isn't toxic, so I don't want to. I guess that's why I brought it up. Is that algae can be really good. Phytoplankton can be. It's really good.
Yeah,
There's just some kind.
Too much of a good thing can be a bad thing sometimes.
But with groundwater, there are lots of other reasons to be concerned because they can be polluted in other ways, and because it takes so long for water to trickle down through the ground and into these aquifers, those pollutants can stay in there for a long time. So lots of other things like arsenic in groundwater is a big concern. In areas where you have lots of, say, dairy production, you can get, or farming, you can get nitrates that leach into the groundwater. You can get all sorts of other pollutants that leach into the groundwater. So groundwater is definitely something that can be affected by pollution, but not so much by the algae blooms. Yeah.
But one of the really, really big problems with aquifers is that we're draining them unsustainably, and it's a really complicated topic. But think of an aquifer like a bank account, and you got to be putting more money into that bank account than you're taking out. Because if you're taking out more than you're putting in, eventually you're going to run out of money. And that's what's happening with aquifers all across the globe, is that we're using them unsustainably, mostly for agriculture. Most of the water that we withdraw from aquifers is used to grow our food. And so this is a really big problem all across the globe.
Because a lot of times aquifers can take thousands of years to fill up with water, and we have the power to take all the water out of them in just a few decades, or in less than a century for a lot of even these huge aquifers. So that's why we got to be really, really concerned about groundwater use. Just another sidebar.
Yeah. Excellent. And I also want to give kudos to the grade 2 student for knowing the word aquifer. Way to go.
Yes. Yeah.
Good teaching. All right, Ms. Fusco's class, if you guys have a question, go on up.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have 2 questions.
Go for it.
Are you doing anything else to celebrate Earth Day?
Okay.
Yeah. There's a friend of ours started this new group in Toronto called the 90s series, and what they're doing is they're promoting a 90% plant-based diet. And so it's like a potluck dinner. They're getting lots of people all across the city to host these sort of 90% plant-based things, dinners, potluck dinners. So like when we're talking about diets, that's just one of the things we're doing to celebrate Earth Day, just sort of like ourselves and amongst like a group of people in the city who really want to celebrate Earth Day. But other than that, there's nothing major we're doing other than doing lots of talks like this. We go to lots of schools. We do lots of presentations in person. So we always do that around Earth Day. We always get lots of requests to come out to schools. And it's great to be a part of something like this because we get to talk to a whole bunch of different schools from all over at one time, which is pretty cool. So this is part of our Earth Month celebration.
Yes, we're so glad to be part of it. Awesome. Ms. Fusco's class, you guys had a second question, so go with that. What's number 2?
Okay, so if the temperature keeps going up around the world, what will happen in the future if we don't help?
Well, that's a very good question. There's a lot of spin-off effects.
Do you enjoy the travel part of your job?
We'll come back to that other class in a minute, guys.
We'll answer that one too, yeah.
Well, absolutely, we enjoy the travel part. That's one of the perks of making documentaries is you get to travel across the world and go to really amazing and unique places. Also places that are really polluted and damaged by environmental, things like climate change. So it can be really rewarding. It can also be a little sad, but we get to meet amazing scientists, researchers, politicians, teachers. So that's always extremely rewarding to get to see how people are trying to address these challenges all across the globe, and the passion and the knowledge that people share and desire to solve these problems is really, really interesting. So that's one of the amazing things about doing a documentary series and getting to travel a lot. It really opens your eyes. And
just that question about climate change, yeah, if we don't do anything, the situation is really, really bad, really bad. We see, more intense wildfires, more intense droughts, more intense rainfall events. So, lots of water falling in, say, 24 hours that would normally fall in an area in a month or a week. So we're getting these really intense rainfall events, which can affect food production. They can actually wash, when we have these really intense rainfall events, that can actually wash a lot of the fertilizers off of farmland, and those enter into our rivers. They flow down our rivers into our lakes and ocean. And once all those fertilizers, we give fertilizers to crops for farms, right? When those intense rainfall events wash all those fertilizers off the farmland, that can actually cause algae in lakes and in the ocean to grow just like the crops on land, except we don't want those extra fertilizers in the water. And so that can lead to algae blooms. So these issues are connected. So we have warmer oceans or warmer lakes where algae want to grow already. And then we give them fertilizers from these more intense rainfall events. So again, it's these interconnected things that are causing problems for us. So we can expect more algae blooms, more wildfires, droughts. Also, ocean warming, loss of coral reefs. Corals don't do well when the water gets too warm. And we also have a problem called ocean acidification. So we did an episode about this called Acid Ocean that we might want to watch because it's kind of a complex story, and I'm not going to give you the whole rundown of it now. But basically, as we put more carbon into the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, a bunch of that carbon dioxide gets absorbed into the ocean. And that actually can change the chemistry of seawater. And when you have too much carbon dioxide in seawater, that can cause these chemical reactions and make it hard for all the shelled organisms in the ocean, so corals, but also things like mussels and oysters, lobsters, all these things that build shells. It can make it harder for them to absorb calcium carbonate into their shells. That's what makes their shells hard. So when we have more CO2 into the ocean, that makes it hard for shelled organisms to grow their shells, and that could lead to an extinction of certain types of marine life. So these are just some of the things that we can expect in the future, and why we really need to act now with climate change, because it's going to impact our oceans and our freshwater in so many different ways. It's not just warming. It's all these different interconnected issues like the algae blooms and the ocean acidification. And, you know, the more fresh water entering into the ocean, that can cause all sorts of problems with ocean circulation. It's really complicated, but there's a lot of reasons to be concerned.
I'm glad we got to that question, guys. All right, we've got time for 2 more questions. We'll do Ms. Robertson's class and then Ms. Miller's class. We'll start with Ms. Robertson's group. If you guys have one, come on up.
Oh.
Yeah, you're good, man.
Yeah, so I wanted to know like how rising sea levels and how they could they engulf like islands that are in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they certainly.
It's already happening. Yeah,
places like the Maldives and.
Yeah, there's some islands in the South Pacific that are really, you know, they're only a couple meters above sea level, and so if you want to think of it this way, you don't actually have to, you know, drown a whole island. You don't have to flood a whole island for people to need to move. Earlier in this presentation, we were talking about saltwater intrusion into groundwater and into farmland. So if you just raise sea levels a bit, that saltwater goes underground, so you don't even see it. It can actually cause the wells to be filled with saltwater. So your freshwater wells now, the sea levels rise far enough that they can, you know, drown out the wells, the freshwater wells, and then there's no drinking water. So it doesn't take a lot of sea level rise for people to need to move. So it doesn't always.
Sea levels. Think of it like it's not going to cover the whole island. Just a little bit can make the island uninhabitable for people, so that there's no fresh water to drink, or the farmland. You can't grow any crops on that land because the salt water is intruded into the soil, and the soil is too salty to grow anything. And so that's, you know, that's you don't need a lot of sea level rise to do some of these coastal islands, islands in the middle of the ocean. But it's not, you know, it's going to impact coastal cities just as much in many different ways where bigger populations of people live.
Yeah, like Florida. Florida is really, really vulnerable to rising sea levels. So it's like cities like Miami that are already experiencing the impacts of that saltwater intrusion. So we don't know. It's not always just islands in the South Pacific. It's, you know, places a lot closer to where all of you guys live. So yeah.
Awesome. All right, we'll wrap up with one last question from Ms. Miller's class. If you guys need, you guys can demute your own mic. So again, microphone symbol top of your screen. For some reason, it's not letting me. And then we'll wrap up from there. But yeah, go right ahead, guys.
Can you see algae bloom in your water, and can you filter it?
Well, most algae blooms, if you live in like a city that has municipal water connection, you wouldn't see it because they do filter algae out. But sometimes the algae blooms can become so intense that they can't filter it out, and then they have to shut down the water system. So you wouldn't necessarily see the algae in your water.
In your drinking water.
But if you do go to like a lake that's experiencing an algae bloom, like Lake Erie experiences algae blooms every summer. So that's a place that's in not too far from where a lot of your classes are. Lake Erie, if you go there, they have algae blooms a lot of summers, and you could dip a glass into that water and pull it out, and you could see what an algae bloom looks like in that water. So yes, they are visible, but you're not going to see one by turning on your tap, because they would shut down the water system before that would ever happen.
All right, gentlemen, before we wrap up, is there any last messages about where people can learn more? Like, where can we guide classes? And again, I'll pass all this along, but where can we guide classes to learn more about your work and about the water issues generally?
Yeah, well, we would just tell you to go to our website, thewaterbrothers.ca or waterbrothers.ca. You can see all of our episodes. You can stream them all online. If some of our classes in the U.S. want to see it, we can send you some links. If they're interested, just please reach out, and we'll make sure you get some other links, because through our website, you can only stream it within Canada. But we want to make sure all of our American friends get to watch the episodes as well. So if you're interested, you can still see all the episodes.
Or you can go, if you're in the US, I highly recommend on our website, we have these interactive stories called Dive Deeper, which is available across the world, and each episode has a Dive Deeper story. So they're about 5-10 minute interactive online experiences that cover all these issues in a pretty cool, fun way to explore and learn. So check out our website and go to the Dive Deeper. Even if you're in Canada too, go to
Dive Deeper.
Yeah.
Super cool, guys. All right, at the end of every hangout, what we do, I'm going to demute the microphone of every class. So Ms. Dawson, Ms. Crosby, so you guys can all join me in saying a big thank you to the Water Brothers for joining us today. Everyone's demuted, guys. Take it away.
You guys, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us today for our